Welcome, everyone, to Pickwick Monthly. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and my Pickwickian co-host for today is James Armstrong. Hi, James.
Hello.
Hello. Hey, I'm drinking tea today. I'm not drinking booze, and I'm not going dry January, everybody. I'm not recovering from holidays. I didn't have enough booze to last, so I didn't want to go out and buy any, so I'm just drinking tea today. How was your holidays, James?
They were lovely. I hope yours were as well.
They were, and we get to extend it today because it's Christmas Day in this part. And that's what we're doing, everyone. For 20 months, we're talking about not just Christmas, but we're talking about Charles Dickens's posthumous papers of the Pickwick Club as it was first serialized in monthly parts from March 1836 until October 1837. Once a month, myself and one of a rotating set of co-hosts talk about each serialized part. Along the way, promise, we'll start to share some of the items in the Rosenbach's collections. We have complete serial issues of the Pickwick Papers, and we have a portion of the Pickwick manuscript. We actually had two portions, and when those chapters come up soon, I will share those manuscript pages. We also have many first signed editions by Dickens, the earliest surviving literary manuscript, letters, ephemera, a lock of Dickens' hair. I'll start sharing some of this stuff as we, finish up the second half of this book. In today's episode, number 11, chapters 30 to 32, we're still celebrating Christmas. As I said, we have Christmas Day ice skating with the Pickwickians, and then we'll return to London for lawyers and bachelors. So that will be fun. If you're watching live right now, I invite you to please like and subscribe and have fun in the live chat. And if you are watching the recording, I also ask you the same. Please like these videos, subscribe to this channel, and I would love for you to leave comments or questions in the comment section if you're watching the recording. Of course, we get to do the live chat for live here right now. Yeah, James, this is well, when it's first published, it's obviously the end of December. People get the Christmas Eve issue, and now at the end of January, they would have gotten this one. So it seems like this is what Dickens would have liked, right? To extend Christmas for 2 straight months is what he really would have liked to do himself.
Well, and Christmas was celebrated throughout the Christmas season back then. It's not like today where December 26th, it's over. And of course, Twelfth Night was a very favorite holiday of Dickens because one of his children was born on Twelfth Night. So he would have a big birthday party for his son every Twelfth Night.
And this is where it begins because Charles Culliford Bowes Dickens was born in January 1837, just before this issue came out. And that kind of begins that tradition for Dickens to celebrate, have this 12. It was his excuse to have an even bigger 12th night party, is what it was. Now it was also and he could do his magic shows for all the kids and have all kinds of fun. It was also an extraordinarily busy month, January 1837 for Dickens. Not only do they welcome Dickens and Catherine, welcome their first child, he's writing Pickwick. He's also begun editing, which was already last month. He's begun editing the newly launched Bentley's Miscellany magazine. And he has now started to write Oliver Twist. The first issue of Bentley's, which was 104 pages, which he completely edits himself and writes to all the authors and has to do everything for. That had appeared the same day, December 31st, last month, as number 10 of Pickwick did. And in that, there was a sketch. Do you know this sketch? The public life of Mr. Tulrumble, once mayor of Mudfog. And that sketch ends with these lines. This is the first time we have published any of our gleanings from this particular source. Perhaps at some future period we may venture to open the Chronicles of Mudfog. Sure enough, the second issue of Bentley's, which will be at the end of this month, would begin with a new serial called Oliver Twist, or the Parish Boy's Progress, with illustrations by George Cruikshank this time, not Fizz. Um, and in the original serial, Oliver, it says in the very beginning, Oliver's born in Mudfog. But when then Dickens publishes it as a book when it's finished, he takes Mudfog out. He wants it to kind of exist on its own, not be tied to Bentley's magazine, which by the time the book comes out, he's already left Bentley's. um, so he also wrote to Bentley, Dickens did at this time. He wrote, and Bentley, Richard Bentley was the publisher. He wrote to Bentley, moreover, I think I have hit on a capital notion for myself and one which will bring Crookshank out. And that's this twist serial, which will run for the whole last half of Pickwick. So once a month now, Pickwick and Oliver Twist. And then when Pickwick ends, he finishes Twist. But then before Twist is over, he starts writing Nicholas Nickleby.
Because you have to be writing at least two books at once, right?
And publishing, writing and publishing two books at once, as the serial format goes. I mean, this is his pattern for the next few years, right? Twist and then Nickleby, and and he's editing Bentley's right now. So this month he's editing Bentley's, he's writing Pickwick, he's writing Twist, he has a new baby, and at the end of the month, both Dickens and Catherine get really sick. And this is another letter Dickens writes to a friend. He says, Mrs. Dickens has been for some days past in a very low and alarming state. She's just had a baby too, right? And although she is a little better this morning, I am obliged to be constantly with her, being the only person who can prevail upon her to take ordinary nourishment. I have been laboring for 2 days past under a violent attack of God knows what, that old disease, in the head. And in addition to all my other worry, I'm experiencing the debility, sickness, and all the other comfortable symptoms consequent upon about as much medicine as would be given to an ordinary sized horse. This is the life that he leads, right? He's like doing 800 things, and Dickens is sick frequently, isn't he, James? So throughout his life.
Yeah, I mean, it started in childhood, some sort of stomach complaint when he was working in Warren's blacking warehouse. He had some sort of attacks and would have to put like hot water bottles on his stomach, I think. And there were numerous problems he had throughout his life, but he was actually, I think, remarkably healthy overall. And when you read about like the walks that he took, it was just a brief jaunt for however many miles, and we read it today and we're like, what, really?
Yeah, a little 30-mile walk was nothing.
No.
30 miles. That's
Yeah.
crazy. What do you call it? Used to do that too. The other author I'm working with these days, Arthur Conan Doyle, used to constantly do like bike ride for,
Yep.
giant, long 30-mile trips, and then it was nothing and very physical. But Dickens himself was so, loved all the walking, loved all that physical activity. But we're frequently, when you read the letters, he has some kind of ailment. Lots of colds, lots of, ailments running through his life that, kind of knock him out for a few days or a week. Never at any time which he can stop working because he has too many writing commitments.
Well, and when you think of the amount of pollution in the air in London
Yeah.
in Dickens's day, it's amazing that people just weren't constantly sick with respiratory ailments
Which he was
365 days a year.
And we know his, famous that's already occurred in his life at this point, where he was going to he had an audition for one of the theaters to be an actor, and
Yeah.
he gets a head cold and he can't go, and then he gets the Pickwick job and doesn't go anyway. So
Yeah.
Well, this issue, this serial number, this is the 11th number of Pickwick, published at the end of January. We ended last month, everyone, you remember, with the goblins who stole a sexton, that ghost story for Christmas Eve, and then it's quickly ended. And now it's chapter 30. The original serial that I'm posting on our site still says chapter 29 because Dickens did 28 for both chapters. My Penguin says chapter 29, but most editions say chapter 30. So that's why we're going with it. It's chapter 30 to 32. It is how the Pickwickians made and cultivated the acquaintance of a couple of nice young men belonging to one of the liberal professions, how they disported themselves on the ice, and how their visit came to a conclusion. And it's Christmas Day. A cold, snowy Christmas day. Well, Sam, said Mr. Pickwick, as that favored servitor entered his bedchamber with his warm water on the morning of Christmas Day, still frosty? Water in the wash-hand basins, a mask of ice, sir. Severe weather, Sam, observed Mr. Pickwick. And then we get the first Wellerism. James, you want to read the first Wellerism?
Fine time for them as is well wrapped up, as the polar bear said to himself when he was practicing his skating, replied Mr. Weller.
There we go. Our first Weller. I think the only Wellerism of this of this serial part. Fine time for them as is well wrapped up, as the polar bear said to himself, and he was practicing his skating. In Dickens's, and we have this image, James, right, of Christmas, white Christmas. It's always snowing in Dickens's, stories, and certainly in this one. In Dickens's day, it was almost always snowy on Christmas. Do you know this? Do you know this whole thing about the little ice age that happened for about 300 years? Dickens was born in 1812, and at least the first 9 years of his life, there's snow at Christmas. So if you have that kind of childhood memory, that's always going to stay with you. And then still, many of the Christmases in his adult life, still had snow at Christmas. From 1550 around, approximately like around 1550 to 1850, the world had what scientists call the Little Ice Age, and particularly in the North Atlantic region, the winters were severely cold, and they can track all the temperatures throughout the centuries. The Thames froze every year until 1814, which shocked me. I knew that it froze sometimes. I didn't know that it always froze.
Well, and the reason it stopped freezing was, I believe, having to do with the bridges and the construction that was made. It was able to freeze because it was able to slow to such a slow rate that would be able to freeze. And then I forget what bridge it was they constructed to
I
know.
don't know. It's just, but they
Yeah.
literally wind up changing the kind of, the flow of the river. So then it stops freezing, not because of the temperature. It's still just as cold every year, but it's the flow prevents it from freezing anymore.
Yeah, it was during the Regency. And they used to always, when the Thames froze over, they would have like an ice fair and go out
Yeah.
and do things
On the
out in the river.
river.
Yeah. But then after,
This goes back to Shakespeare's day. I mean, back to the 16th century, they're doing this on the river.
Mhm.
Yeah, so Dickens is so the idea of this kind of white Christmas that always seems to happen in Dickens novels that we wish would happen all the time here too. Well, I guess some people wish it would always happen. This is normal for Dickens and his life. It's not like, oh, isn't I so hope we get snow for Christmas. It's gonna snow at Christmas, and that's just part of the whole holiday. So they Mr. Pickwick gets up here, and Sam tells him there's a couple of sawbones downstairs, and Mr. Pickwick doesn't know what this term means, which I think odd, but I guess I don't know. Is this a new term in the 19th century? I didn't look up the origin of the word, but it's probably fairly new. to call doctors sawbones.
Yeah, I associate it most with the 19th century, and in particular, like with the American West, the idea of
Yeah.
the doctor being called the Sawbones. I don't know that it was really around a lot in the 18th century, so maybe it is still a
Yeah.
little new. And also, Mr. Pickwick, he's still catching on to some of these things. In many ways, he is uh, more of an 18th century kind of guy who's still trying to adjust to some of these new ways.
Well, Sam tells him they're studying, so in training, and Mr. Pickwick realizes, oh, they're medical students, and he assumes that they're fine fellows with judgments matured by observation and reflection, and tastes refined by reading and study. And we see this, like, this is a setup clearly that they're going to be the opposite of this. Um, and Sam's response to that is, they're a smoking cigars by the kitchen fire. um, Overflowing with kindly feelings and animal spirits, Mr. Pickwick thinks. He's got the positive spin on everything, doesn't he? This is something that's happening to him. It's not um we've moved from this kind of credulous naivete early on to now this benevolence that's him always looking at the positive side of things as this novel goes forward. Um, they're smoking and they're also drinking and they're also eating oysters. Um, uh, One of them's drinking brandy neat too. So it's morning, people. He's just starting on the brandy, but brandy's brandy, right? This isn't, it's medicinal even. Um,
They're
he also
doctors. We can trust them.
Yes, well, and it's one of their this is their primary medicine is brandy. Um, Sam says one he says even one of them he says him in the barnacles, and I just wanted to gloss that for people. Barnacles just mean eyeglasses. Um, and It's funny that Sam would use that's the slang that Sam would use, barnacles for eyeglasses. And Dickens and Pickwick, though, in hearing them about this, eating oysters and drinking and smoking, he thinks eccentricities of genius, Sam. You may retire. Um, I wish everybody would think that when I'm being idle and just sitting around drinking. Eccentricities of genius. Wouldn't that be nice? So instead of just procrastinating and not working. Um, Pickwick goes down and meets them, and this is Mr. Benjamin Allen and Bob Sawyer. Who is Allen? James. He is
He's the brother of Arabella.
he's the brother of Arabella, the girl with the black eyes and the fur-trimmed boots that Winkle has fallen for. And Mr. Bob Sawyer is his very good friend who is I love how his name, well, he's given him, they're called Sawbones. Did you catch this? And now his name is Sawyer, which is one who cuts wood. So there we go. Um, uh, that's why Dickens has come up with his name as Sawyer. And he calls him, oh, I missed the one funny line about Alan. He has the usual number of pepper and salt colored legs, which I thought was funny. So he has two legs. The usual number of legs is the way he's being described here. And he has no vestige of a linen wristband and no collar. So he basically, gentlemen have linen. They wear collars and wristbands and, or cuffs. Um, but Benjamin Allen doesn't bother with this kind of stuff, which means he's not as respectable, and he has a rather mildewy appearance, and a fragrant odor of full flavored Cubas, which are the cigars. Sawyer is very slovenly looking, and on the whole looks something like a dissipated Robinson Crusoe. which seems to be I mean, that's just a funny line in and of itself to be a dissipated Robinson Crusoe. Um, but Crusoe gets mentioned an awful lot in Dickens novels. There's three Crusoe mentions in Pickwick Papers over the whole book. This is the second time. We've already had a reference to it. One day, James, I'm going to go through all the books and find out if every novel has a reference at somewhere to Robinson Crusoe. And it might actually be true.
I wouldn't be surprised. It was such a popular book during that era. And if you read, I think it's in The Moonstone by Dickens's friend Wilkie Collins, there's a character who uses Robinson Crusoe basically for divination purposes. Like
Oh
some
yeah.
people where they're like, I don't know what to do. I'll just take the Bible and I'll open the Bible up at random and I'll read a passage from the Bible and it will give me light from God. And there's a character in the Moonstone who does this with Robinson Crusoe. And he's like, yes, whenever I don't know what to do, I just open up Robinson Crusoe and there's always a quote I can use in my life. Which Collins is sort of making fun of, but he wouldn't be able to be making fun of that in the 1860s if it hadn't become
Yeah.
such a recognizable thing of people sort of elevating Robinson Crusoe as this great masterpiece, which people still read it today, but I don't know how many people today would
I think it's gone
consider
away.
it a
I
masterpiece.
think it's gone away being read so much even. It used to be, and for Dickens too, it's not only like very knowable popular culture title story in Dickens's day, which it is. It's also one of his favorite books, and
Yeah.
that's why he always mentions it too. But I wonder if it's still around. I used to include it. I used to give my students in college a test and ask them all kinds of questions to see if this stuff is still available, like it's still out there in the pop culture world. And I used to ask them if they knew who Robinson Crusoe was, and many of them didn't actually. It has kind of gone away, um, and people don't read it as much as they used to. It basically becomes one of the books that you use that you'll read it in college in like a history of novel class kind of thing,
Yeah.
but that's kind of about it. It's still an exciting and a really enjoyable story, which is a shame. But you mentioned that divination thing. People would use it. They would open it up and then this would give them some kind of prophecy. Dickens did that himself once with Tristram Shandy when he was going to when he right before he's writing Dombey and Son. He this is a story. This was written in from Andrew Lang wrote this up, and I can't remember where he got. He might have gotten it from Forster, but he says from John Forster, Dickens' friend, who wrote the first bio of him. He wrote when Dickens was in wanted to begin the book. His next book he wants to begin, and he opened a book. He chose Tristram Shandy, and the sentence that his eye hit right away was, "What a work it is likely to turn out. Let us begin it." And he was like,
Hmm.
"Oh, all right, then I have to start writing my Dombey and Son." So that's what he did. So Sortes Virgiliani, they call that. It's because people used to use Virgil's works to
Mm.
do this in the Middle Ages. And you would open a work of Virgil and put your finger down, and wherever that went down, that was the prophecy. I'm sure it happens with a lot of other authors, but with Virgil, it was the first um, major one. So, somebody in the chat says the first use of sawbones is in the OED, credits Dickens with the first
Oh.
example of it. So maybe it is. It seems like a 19th century word to me, and it's not that Dickens invented the word; it's that it was likely being used, and this is the first printed version that at least the OED has found so far. Um, and that frequently happens that people are credited with the first time a word has been cited, but actually it had probably been in use before. And so I wonder. I have to look that word up. Um, Thank you, both Jim and David, for commenting on that. Well, the Sawbones do nothing but talk about body parts and dissecting just as their casual conversation. Nothing like dissecting to give one an appetite, said Mr. Bob Sawyer. Mr. Pickwick slightly shuddered. And then Alan says, by the by, Bob, have you finished that leg yet? Nearly, replied Sawyer, helping himself to half a fowl as he spoke. It's a very muscular one for a child's, is it? And they're talking about real body parts that Alan would borrow to dissect, to learn dissection as, a as a medical student. And they even finish with Bob Sawyer says, I wouldn't mind a brain, but I couldn't stand a whole head. Um, you had shared this picture with me, James. Let me pull this
Yes.
up here. And this is the operating theater.
Yes, the old operating theater in Southwark, which is where Bob Sawyer lives in the borough of Southwark. And this, you can visit it today. It's actually across the street from, I believe, a place where John Keats was living for a while, because Keats studied medicine. And you can visit it. And this is where people like Sawyer and Allen would go as students to observe the different operations being performed. Uh, I went there, and this was after COVID, and so they had these flashing lights. There's like a red stoplight and a green go light, and I assume that this was because of COVID that they didn't want too many people in there. But no, it was because in order to get up there, you had to go through the narrowest little spiral staircase to get up there. But it had to be on the top floor so they could have a big skylight because they needed the natural light to come in to fully light the operating theater. I believe there still is one of these operating theaters in Philadelphia. Is that right?
I think there is too, but I don't know where it is. And it might be the same one in that Akins painting
Hmm.
that he used to go to, but I'll have to look that up. Is this a pipe hanging on the wall in the back here?
That appears to be a pipe, yes.
It
I'm
is.
not entirely
Oh,
sure why.
I clicked over here. Yeah, right here in the back.
Yeah. They had a whole bunch of just different exhibits. You can see tools and stuff. They also have like an herb closet that they open to the public, and you can sort of see all of these herbs hanging out to dry as they would have for an apothecary.
So this is the kind of theater that Allen and Sawyer would be in the seats or up in the decks around here,
Yep.
standing over at the railings, looking
Yep.
down at the doctor, showing them how to dissect, and then hopefully they would get their own body parts or full bodies, maybe stolen even, that they could practice on.
Yeah.
That's also this day and age. This is the all the as the medical profession is developing, um and people and their doctors are realizing they need to practice more and more on actual bodies to continue to learn how to practice medicine. This is the whole body snatching that occurs in England and America and wherever there are doctors studying. They need fresh bodies to dissect. They
You have that great Robert Louis Stevenson short story, The Body Snatcher, all about the procurement
yeah.
of these bodies and body parts for the medical students. And in that story too, I think you have some of the students sort of arguing over, I want a head, or no, a head's too much for me, and that sort of a thing. And uh, it was, I guess, part of the sort of standard comedy of the day, very dark, gruesome comedy. But this was, by the time you get to Robert Louis Stevenson, almost a an old joke
Yeah.
of all of the doctors or medical students competing for different body parts.
And of course, there's the famous case of Burke and Hare, who were just murdering people and then bringing them to doctors. And
Yeah.
finally, one of them was recognized. Hey, isn't that whoever? And this is Robert Louis Stevenson kind of creates his own story out of this, the way this went down with him. And but yeah, it's happening. People are and people don't realize how easy it was too, I think, to steal bodies once they've been buried, because number one, they couldn't bury them that deep because most churchyards are full by this point. And so they're only down a little bit. And second of all, you don't even have to dig the whole body up or the whole coffin up. You just dig a hole and go down and break through the coffin lid if there is a coffin, and then you just hook the body and you pull it up out of the hole. They don't even dig the whole body up. They just go down, hook it, and then haul it up through a hole. So it's a pretty quick process for them to steal bodies that have just been buried.
And this becomes a plot point in Tale of Two Cities as well.
Mm-hmm. All righty. Well, back to the story. Enough body snatching, although I'd love to do a whole show on body snatching. They are talking. They're still in the breakfast room here, and then in comes some of the others. The ladies come in, escorted by Snodgrass, Winkle, and Tupman. They were out on an early walk, and Arabella. It says, "Why, Ben," said Arabella, in a tone which expressed more surprise than pleasure at the sight of her brother. So this is their relationship, just encapsulated in a little tiny line there. She wants to introduce Mr. Winkle to them, because Winkle and Arabella have clearly been, getting along here, are interested in each other. And as soon as they come into Benjamin Allen says, "Don't you see Bob Sawyer, Arabella?" Meaning he's trying to get his sister to pay attention to Sawyer. A thrill of hatred struck to Mr. Winkle's heart as Bob Sawyer inflicted on the proffered hand a perceptible squeeze. And then she's, then this is when now she introduces Winkle. And Mr. Winkle and Mr. Bob Sawyer glanced mutual distrust out of the corners of their eyes. So, they recognize that they're rivals right off the bat. Which will lead to, things in the future in this novel. It's as it seems, this is gonna, happen here, that there is a rival for this woman here. Poor Winkle, he's got somebody, she's also interested in him, but there's a rival that's gonna get in his way. Well, they all go to church, and at church, Alan falls fast asleep, and Bob Sawyer spends his time carving his name on the seat of the pew. That's that's the not the serious men that Mr. Pickwick thinks that they are. Well, now we get to the ice skating. Well, oh no, I'm sorry. First, a substantial lunch with the agreeable items of strong beer and cherry brandy, and then an hour on the ice is what is being proposed by Mr. Wardle. They're still at Dingley Dell, everyone, still out in the country, side at the farm, or the gentleman farm that Wardle has. And you skate, of course, Winkle, said Wardle. Yes. Oh, yes, replied Winkle as he stutters through. Like, we've had this already. The last time it was hunting, right? And Winkle's like, of course, like, he's supposed to be the sportsman, and then he can't fire a gun. It's all over the place. He's shooting people. and Pickwick gets all angry at him because of this, because he's supposed to be the sportsman and he's doing nothing but embarrassing the Pickwickians. Well, the same is going to happen with skating. And of course, as soon as Arabella says, "Oh, do skate, Mr. Winkle. I like to see it so much." Well, now he's sunk. Now he has to skate.
Yeah.
But I have no skates. And of course, there's lots of skate. But he's like, "Oh, no, no, we have skates." So he can't get out of it at all. He looked exquisitely uncomfortable. They read this little paragraph here, James. All this time, Mr. Winkle.
All this time, Mr. Winkle, with his face and hands blue with the cold, had been forcing a gimlet into the soles of his feet and putting his skates on with the points behind and getting the straps into a very complicated and entangled state with the assistance of Mr. Snodgrass, who knew rather less about skates than a Hindu. At length, however, with the assistance of Mr. Weller, the unfortunate skates were firmly screwed and buckled on, and Mr. Winkle was raised to his feet.
"Now then, sir," said Sam in an encouraging tone, "off with you and show 'em how to do it."
"Stop, Sam, stop," said Mr. Winkle, trembling violently and clutching hold of Sam's arms with the grasp of a drowning man. "How slippery it is, Sam!"
"Not an uncommon thing upon ice, sir," replied Mr. Weller. So it's not going to end well. Of course, Winkle has the frantic desire to throw his feet in the air and dash the back of his head on the ice. He's just, he can't, and I can't skate at all. I've tried several times. I have terrible balance, and it would take me a long time to really kind of get the hang of it. So the few times I've tried, after just being flat on the ice so many times, I just like, okay, that's enough for today. Do you skate, James?
I do. And I have to say, you're very unusual in admitting that the problem is you
It is
and not the
entirely
skates.
not the ice.
Well, the skates is what people generally blame, and that's exactly what Winkle does. He says, "These are very awkward skates, ain't they, Sam?" And I feel like that happens today too, when
And
somebody's having trouble. "Oh, it's the skates. The skates
yeah,
aren't
and well, it's the salmon.
right."
And Sam says, "I'm afeard there's an awkward gentleman in him, sir." And yeah, I'm an awkward gentleman on skates. Absolutely. I can't even roller skate. I couldn't roller skate as a kid. I barely can ride a bike. I had the hardest time on a bike. I was always shaky on a bike. I don't know. I just don't balance well on. I just need to walk. That's it. Um, but Winkle is a disaster, and but he's very happy to have Sam helping him, and he's even trying to bribe him to not let go. Right? He says, "I meant to have given you 5 shillings this morning for a Christmas box, Sam. I'll give it to you this afternoon." And but Sam finally has to, let him go. And the impression here of him hanging on to him is the image here is Mr. Winkle stooping forward with his body half doubled up, was being assisted over the ice by Mr. Weller in a very singular and unswan-like manner. And then this is when Pickwick calls Sam over to him, so he has to let go. And of course, read there with a violent effort.
With a violent effort, Mr. Weller disengaged himself from the grasp of the agonized Pickwickian, and in so doing administered a considerable impetus to the unhappy Mr. Winkle. With an accuracy which no degree of dexterity or practice could have ensured, that unfortunate gentleman bore swiftly down into the center of the reel at the very moment when Mr. Bob Sawyer was performing a flourish of unparalleled beauty. Mr. Winkle struck wildly against him, and with a loud crash, they both fell heavily down. Mr. Pickwick ran to the spot. Bob Sawyer had risen to his feet, but Mr. Winkle was far too wise to do anything of the kind in skates. He was seated on the ice, making spasmodic efforts to smile, but anguish was depicted on every lineament of his countenance. Are
Of
you
all the
hurt?
people for him to run into, it's Bob Sawyer.
Yeah.
His rival, as he has to go crash into him. But Sawyer's fine, and Winkle just sits there. And then Benjamin Allen's like, "Let me bleed you." No, thank you. I really think you had better. I mean, he's really like, "Oh my gosh, somebody's hurt. I can bleed him." Um, yes, and doctors did this. Still, it's one of the things that is kind of losing it's becoming out of, not as many doctors are bleeding people by the 1830s, but it does still go on. It
Yeah.
stretches, into the 20th, into the 19th century, not the 20th. I hope no one was getting bled in the 20th century. So, although there are some things now where people it's recommended for, is for some things, isn't it?
Yeah, well, if you have body parts reattached, it's often necessary, and that's why now there are medicinal leeches being bled again.
Medicinal leeches, I've heard of this. Yes.
Yeah, because like if you lose a finger and they reattach the finger, the it's going to take a while before all of the capillaries line up again, and you can reattach the major veins and arteries, but other
I
things
I
are
seem to
just
have remember there was some like even or like there was almost some kind of like homeopathic remedies kind of thing to do bleeding for. I don't know if I think that's
could
going.
be.
So not me. Nobody's bleeding me. So
Well, we've got cupping back too.
yeah.
That's something people stopped doing for a long time, and that's back again.
Well, he's not going to get bled. He's fallen on the ice, everyone. There's no need for bleeding. Although brandy would have been a better, offer right here. Quick, the brandy. Um, they and Mr. Pickwick sees all this though, and he was excited and indignant. And he tells Sam in a stern voice, "Take his skates off." Pickwick is not going to have any of the Pickwickians from the Pickwick Club embarrass themselves in a sporting endeavor. And he tells Winkle, "You're a humbug, sir." "A what?" "A humbug, sir. I will speak plainer if you wish it. An impostor, sir." Um, and he is very, angry at that. And also to point out too, well, clearly humbug, we all, know from Christmas Carol, Christmas Bah Humbug, from Scrooge. But that is the meaning of humbug, and Pickwick gives it an imposter. It's deception, fraud. It's when you pretend to be something you're not, and that's what Scrooge is saying about Christmas. Christmas is a humbug because it's a time where we pretend everything's nice and wonderful, and things are not nice and wonderful. It's hypocrisy is what Scrooge is getting at when he calls Christmas a humbug. Well, he is a humbug. Um, Winkle for saying he could skate when he can't, and and then Mr. Pickwick decides he is going to join in the fun here. First, Mr. Weller and the Fat Boy are cut out a slide, which I assume is, I don't know, like it seems like when it says cut out, does that mean it's on the snow on the bank? I was looking up a lot of this, trying to figure out like what exactly they're getting to, because it seems like there's a place where they all can go through. It's not on the ice, is it?
I had thought that it was because when in Christmas Carol, when Bob Cratchit goes for a slide, it's on the ice on the street.
Yeah.
The
Here
the
they're
kids
on a
are
frozen ice, so
yeah.
I don't know where you're cutting a slide out. It's just one area that's going to be the slide. You surely can't cut into
Oh,
the ice, or maybe that's why Pickwick will fall in eventually. I don't know.
yeah. No, I had assumed it was on the ice, but maybe it's not. Maybe it is through the snow. I'm not sure.
I've read a Christmas Ghost story recently, and towards the end of the 19th century, it was toward the end of the 19th century, and they make like a slide like in the snow,
Oh,
to go down, and they're pushing people down the slide in these wine crates. So in any case, there is a slide here that they're all going down. Sam is particularly and his shoes, and so he's not on skates. And that I think that's the key here. The slide is for people to go just on their shoes. You don't put skates on. And Sam is good at it. The beautiful feat of fancy sliding, which is currently denominated knocking at the cobbler's door, in which you skim down when your one foot you're like knocking on the ice while your other foot is staying on the ice the whole time. And Mr. Pickwick thinks, this looks like fun. And the ladies all say, oh, you should do it. And so now we're going to get Mr. Pickwick away went the good-tempered old fellow down the slide. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's first. This is Wardle first. It says he goes down the slide. And then Mr. Pickwick does it too. And after it does a few runs. And we're going to get the fizz image in a second. And let's just do that. Let's do the fizz image. And then I'll share your image first.
Okay.
You had shared this with me. And what I love is that it's like Pickwick merch.
Yes.
Where is it?
This is a jigsaw puzzle from circa 1909. This image was shared with me by a Bob Armstrong, as far as I know, no relation of mine, but he collects old jigsaw puzzles and in particular loves all of the different Dickens themed puzzles that were sold. Today, jigsaw puzzles are going to be interlocking. These are not really interlocking pieces.
Yeah, you see the edges here. It's just you just have to figure out where they go.
That was how apparently most jigsaws were done for a long time. And also they used to cut along the color lines. So if you look at, say, or look at Arabella's dress, it's cut along the edge of the dress.
Yeah.
Within the dress, there's also individual pieces. But that's also something we don't so much do anymore. But that was popular in the early 20th century. And there were tons and tons of these jigsaw puzzles based on Dickens scenes. And in particular, in the run-up to 1912, which was the big centenary of Dickens's birth, there were just all of these different companies releasing Dickens merch, all of these puzzles you could buy based on scenes from Dickens novels. In 2012, I don't know of any puzzles that came out that were based on a Dickens scene, but back in 1912, I guess, puzzles were much more of a thing, and people wanted their Dickens-themed jigsaw puzzles.
Yeah. I love how they focus on Arabella here.
Yeah.
Too. Like she's right in the center. The pretty girl, it's not Mr. Pickwick. He's in the back here with Sam, and this is the fat boy. Here's Mr. Wardle.
Yep.
And here it's just an area where they're all just sliding down themselves. Max in our chat here had mentioned that, and he thought of It's a Wonderful Life, where they go and they slide down. There's a slide, and then they end up on the ice, and that's where, he is a child, and the movie goes in, the ice cracks. But yeah, I don't know what exactly Dickens wants me to slide, but they're absolutely on their feet, and that's the point. See this? When I'd still fall all over the place, but I could do this better than I could with skates. I remember once we had it was rain, and then it froze, and it was like a tennis court, and it was like a sheet of ice in a tennis court, and we all went out in our just sneakers and played hockey. which normally we'd have to run, but we were just sliding around at hockey. So it was all of us kids who couldn't skate. We couldn't ice skate like real hockey players. So we pretended to ice skate and played hockey on it. And it was the best street hockey time I ever had. They as they're doing this, well, Mr. Pickwick is when he was knocked down, which happened upon the average every third round. It was the most invigorating sight that can possibly be imagined to behold him gather up his hat, gloves, and handkerchief with a glowing countenance and resume his station in the rank with an ardor and an enthusiasm that nothing could abate. And that's Mr. Pickwick, right? That's his, I mean, that's his philosophy. You fall down a lot and you just smile and you get up and do it again. I love that about him. And that is his, the way he behaves in life. Unfortunately, very soon a sharp, smart crack was heard, and down goes Mr. Pickwick through the ice, and all they could see in the water is his hat, gloves, and handkerchief floating on the surface. Males turned pale, females fainted. Snodgrass and Mr. Winkle grasped each other by the hand, and Mr. Tupman, by way of rendering the promptest assistance and at the same time conveying to any persons who might be within hearing the clearest possible notion of the catastrophe, ran off across the country at his utmost speed, screaming, "Fire!" with all his might. So a disaster occurs, and I love that Tupman runs off yelling fire.
Which is the exact opposite of what the actual disaster is.
Yes, but if you yell ice, I know nobody's going to come. So fire, you get everybody's attention. So, but soon Mr. Pickwick comes up, he emerges, and it turns out that it was less than 5 feet of water. He just fell on his back and he couldn't get up right away. So he's not drowning. They get him out and pile on all the shawls. All the women offer their shawls to him. A dozen shawls were offered on the instant. And then we have the singular phenomenon of an elderly gentleman dripping wet and without a hat, and his arms bound down to his sides, skimming over the ground without any clearly defined purpose at the rate of 6 good English miles an hour as he runs off to the house to quick get under the covers and get warm. And recover. So, which he does, but he only recovers for one reason. And what is that, James?
Brandy?
A bowl of punch.
Oh, punch. Sorry.
Brandy, punch, whatever. There was probably brandy in the punch, right? It was brandy and rum, probably. That was Dickens's favorite punch. So, yeah, so it was brandy, but throw some rum in it and some sugar and some lemon, and there you go. And a grand carouse was held in the honor of his safety. Soon a second and third bowl were ordered in, and the next morning there was not a symptom of rheumatism about him. Well, after 3 bowls of punch, I'm not surprised. Even Mr. Bob Sawyer, medical doctor in training, says, justly observed, there is nothing like hot punch in such cases, and that if ever hot punch did fail to act as a preventative, it was merely because the patient fell into the vulgar error of not taking enough of it. So I have to agree with Bob Sawyer on this point here. Hot punch will get you through it. Well, before this chapter ends, we have this little note of melancholy, James, which I find interesting. We had this in the last, the kind of, when Dickens is first talking about Christmas in chapter 28, the Christmas chapter, he starts it off by talking about how one of the things that makes Christmas so wonderful is that the people who died we remember, so it's that kind of melancholic note to, that kind of makes your joy even more valuable, is because, in remembering the people that you don't have with you. But there's a little weird moment even here. It says the jovial party broke up next morning Breakings up are capital things in our school days, but in afterlife, they are painful enough. Death, self-interest, and fortune's changes are every day breaking up many a happy group and scattering them far and wide, and the boys and girls never come back again. We do not mean to say that it was exactly the case in this particular instance. And then he like backtracks from it, like, oh, but not here. Like this is a different kind of breaking up. Well, then why bring up the breaking up part of it? Is this what do you think of this? Like Dickens seems to like throw these melancholic moments and in at times where that's not really what he's trying to convey, but he wants us to be aware of it. Is that what's going on?
Well, it seems to be mirrored in the overall structure of the novel, where we begin with just this is a funny novel, and we're going to be making fun of these goofy guys. And as you go on, we get not just hints of some sadness, but the novel actually is going to be going to some rather serious places by the time we get to the end. And I think it is part of what makes Dickens Dickens.
Mhm.
In Oliver Twist, he talks about the streaky bacon theory, where you got to sort of alternate between the comedy and the tragedy, and the fact that you have those streaks in the bacon make the comedy funnier and the tragedy more dramatic. And we're gonna see more and more of these moments as the book goes on.
Mhm. Well, they break up now anyway, and but they're all fine. And as a matter of fact, Bob Sawyer, he invites Pickwick to come see him in London. You have to come see me, come to one of my parties. And then he produces a card, and he lives on Lant Street,
Mhm.
um, near Guy's, and this is in Southwark. But it's also first I saw Lant Street and I was like, oh my gosh, Lant? You mean like old urine that they would this is what was called, people. You would in the past, even into the 19th century, you would save your urine and it could be used for things. It could be used to like clean clothes. I know you're thinking, what? Clean my clothes? No, you let it sit for a while. It's that real acidic thing that could take stains out and things like that. They use it in other processes too, things that they do. They use it in beer. You put a little, stretch your beer at the end there, use a little old lant in it. No wonder they called it lant and not just piss, because you don't want to say that. Um, but so I thought maybe the street was named for that. I did look up though. The street's not actually named for that. I thought maybe it was a place where there was a like that had a big factory and this is what these were. No, it was like a guy. It was like Thomas Lant or something like
Yeah.
that was named after. So but what is on Lant Street, James?
Well, it's right near the Marshalsea debtors prison.
There you go.
And that was where Dickens was staying when the rest of his family was in the Marshalsea.
Yeah.
He was boarded in a house on Lant Street.
On Lant Street, yeah. So Marshalsea Prison's right there. Dickens is 12 years old. His father's put in there in 1824, and that's where Dickens lived on Lant Street. So he's using a place right out of his, childhood. He knows this area well. Not that he's willing to admit any of this stuff to anyone in real life. This all comes out later, really, when Forster writes his biography. That Dickens didn't want people to know this stuff about him and his family, of course. It also says it's near Guy's. Guy's is a teaching hospital. Um, there that is likely where, there, and there's another hospital they mentioned later, but we'll get to that when they mention it later. But Guy's is one of the teaching hospitals that's down there near there too. So that's where Bob Sawyer and lives and where they are going to visit. And just before they part, we get the little romance here. Mr. Winkle was whispering during this brief conversation to Arabella Allen, and Mr. Snodgrass was conversing apart with Emily Wardle. And then as they're driving away, they said nothing at all to Mr. Pickwick or Mr. Tupman for 8 and 20 miles, and that they sighed very often refused ale and brandy and looked gloomy. If our observant lady readers can deduce any satisfactory inferences from these facts, we beg them by all means to do so. So it's funny here that there's still there's that difference here in stories that Dickens is like, oh, if I'm writing about romance, I'm writing it for the ladies. Um, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Yeah, everybody knows what you're talking about, Dickens. So they are in love, and their parting is a little sorrowful because now they don't get to spend time with these women. And especially for Winkle, he now has a competitor that he didn't know about.
Hmm.
Not from Arabella, though, from her brother. Her brother wants this, competitor, Sawyer, on the scene. So, all right. Before we get to the next chapter, let's have our little mid break here. We'll read some letters. Let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of Dickens lovers worldwide. Please, if you would like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website. You could also become a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website as well. And a Rosenbach membership makes a great gift. Even just because the holiday season has ended doesn't mean you can't gift people memberships at the Rosenbach. That happens frequently in these shows, and I really love that. There are lots of great in-person and virtual programs and courses coming up at the Rosenbach. Our winter offerings are out there now. There are courses on Dracula. You do a course on Dracula. We have the Bram Stoker's notes for Dracula at the Rosenbach and many other first editions of the novel and all this stuff. And I lead a course on Dracula. That begins soon, and it's online. If you're in the Philadelphia area, you can actually come to the Rosenbach for an early session at the end of this month and see the materials in person, but I also do that presentation online for everyone. There's going to be a course on Robert Burns that is online as well. We have one of the greatest Robert Burns collections in the world at the Rosenbach, manuscripts and of his poems and early editions and books owned by Burns that he has written dedications in and written poems in. There's going to be a course on James Joyce's Ulysses, and it's going to be a weekly course, 18 weeks leading up to Bloomsday. I know you always said, I'll read Ulysses one day. Well, this is how you read it. You read it with a group of people all at once. It is a blast. It is a lot of fun. What you might not realize is how funny a novel Ulysses is. So Dickens gets mentioned a couple times in it. Does Pickwick get mentioned? I think that might be in Finnegan's Wake. But anyway, a lot of fun. And there's also going to be a Virginia Woolf course, which might even be sold out at this point. That one went quickly, and that's online as well. I'd also recommend to everyone to tune into also to our other biblioventure going on right now, Sherlock Mondays, that runs weekly. If you want to have some fun in between your Pickwick episodes, you can tune in live on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern, or watch the replays on YouTube. They're all up there. You can find them all on our YouTube channel on the playlists of Sherlock Mondays. And I wanted to let everybody know, too, before we next air Pickwick, we will be celebrating Dickens's birthday, which happens on February 7th, 1812. Dickens was born. And in Philadelphia, we celebrate every year at Clark Park in West Philadelphia, where there is a statue of Dickens in a chair, and then next to him is, down below him on the ground, looking up at him, is Little Nell. And this used to be the only Dickens statue in the world. People famously interpreted Dickens saying, I don't want any memorials for me, meaning, oh, you mean no statues, so no statues. And so there weren't any statues of Dickens except the Philadelphia one, because we're in Philly. We're like, what? We're gonna do whatever we want. So there was a statue here in Philly. It was actually made by someone and it wound up in Philly. But when the Dickens family had no interest in having it, it wound up in Philadelphia.
We also had the one in Australia that was headless for a long time.
Yeah, and then that was there for a while, and then it lost its head. So for a while, this one in Clark Park was there, and now there's one in Portsmouth as well.
Yep.
So and the Australian one was renovated, so it has the head again, and it exists. But what we do in Philadelphia is we're going to do this on February 4th. It's always right before the birthday or the Sunday before. We're going to have readings at a local church hall. It used to be at another place. Now it's at a church hall. It's called the Fellowship Hall of Resurrection Church. It's at 42nd and Pine Streets. I'll post all this information on our Facebook group as well. We do readings at the church hall, and then there's a local Morris Men group in West Philadelphia who come every year. They're going to lead us all a couple blocks to the statue in Clark Park, and we'll crown the statue of Dickens and Little Nell with laurels. Usually get some of the little kids there and they climb up and put the laurels on. I'll post about this. It'll be a lot of fun. But James, you also have a great celebration in New York City.
Yeah, the Friends of Dickens New York is going to be getting together at McGee's Pub on Saturday, the 3rd of February. So it'll be a few days early. But if people want to go to thefriendsofdickens.org, that's our website. There's some information there. There's also a contact button. You can fill in some information and it will send your question right to me. And I'd be happy to help out anybody who wants directions to McGee's Pub at 12:30 on February the 3rd. We'd love to have folks come in and join us for a Dickens luncheon. We're going to have a special guest speaker. Bridget Chalk, who teaches at Manhattan College, is going to be giving a talk on Dickens and modernism. And so it should be a fun time. We generally put on a brief reading. There's always somebody who makes a toast to the immortal memory of Charles Dickens. It's a lot of fun. So if you have been enjoying Pickwick Monthly and you live in the New York area, go to thefriendsofdickens.org, drop me a line. We'd love to see you there.
Excellent. And you post that. We'll post that on our Facebook group page.
Yes,
too.
I should do that. Yeah.
So you'll have that information there, or if you don't access Facebook, you can always send me an email at the Rosenbach, epettit@rosenbach.org, and I will send that information to you if you need it. But wherever you are, if you don't celebrate on that weekend for one of these, on February 7th, you should raise a glass to the creator of Pickwick. So that's what I'll be doing. Remember, you can always write to me at epettit@rosenbach.org, and I may share your questions and comments on this segment called The Corresponding Members of Pickwick Monthly. It is always a pleasure to receive Henrietta J's detailed responses to each episode. I seriously, I absolutely love this. She sends out a whole email with like all little, numbered points of all the things that she has seen in this. Thank you, Henrietta, for doing this. I really love it. Here's one of the things that she sent last month about from number 10, Dickens's portrayal of Stiggins. Remember, Stiggins is the preacher's kind of assistant who's, Tony Weller's wife is like, thinks that he's all great and he just does and sits at her bar and just drinks all her drink and eats all her food. But anyway, Henrietta wrote, Mr. Stiggins is a character well known to Dickens's early readers. The Church of England has a growing section called Methodists in England, appealing to working classes and developing in various directions. The non-trained leaders, unlike Church of England leadership, would begin to reach further from formal teachings in order to connect with their converts. Out of the new group will come also the Salvation Army, but only in another decade or so. Dickens would use mocking these people as much as some today mock extreme evangelical groups. His readers would enjoy the fun. So yeah, that whole Methodist movement, Dickens is really not a fan of that at all and mocks it frequently. This from Maureen C. in Connecticut, a nice little email. Just hello and happy New Year, Ed. Wishing you and your family and your Rosenbach Library colleagues a truly magical New Year's Eve celebration and great health, adventures, laughter, and memorable reading in the new year ahead. Maureen writes, I became a member of the Rosenbach Library after joining your Mondays with Jane Austen book group, and I'm now enjoying enormously your monthly Saturday Pickwick Papers online, as well as the weekly Monday Sherlock Mondays. It has been such great fun and a genuine pleasure in these strange and alarming days. Like the comments from the letter you referenced from a donating member of the two current book groups that I read last month, you have provided genuine pleasure and warm sustenance during this dark time, not to mention your fabulous recipes. And that, if people aren't watching Sherlock Mondays, every week we have a Sherlock tale that were all designed by one of my co-hosts, Mary Alcaro, and we have cocktails every month for that. So thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Henrietta. I love to hear from you all. So if anyone has a question or comment about a serial part for the month, or just Dickens in general, or something nice to say about the Rosenbach, do not hesitate to drop me a note at epettit@rosenbach.org. And that is it for the mid-break today. Let us get back to the issue, because we're now at chapter 31, which is all about the law and sundry great authorities learned therein. Dickens, the chapter starts with talking about Temple Bar and the various holes and corners and dark and dirty chambers there. He gives a little kind of, hierarchy of lawyers, clerks, or the articled clerk, the salaried clerk, the middle-aged copying clerk, and then the office lads and their first surtutes. Dickens knew this, right? He was a clerk, and then he was a reporter in these areas, so he knows all this stuff firsthand. This kind of satire, he's way he's describing all these people. He was there. He saw all this. He did all this stuff for a few years.
He's even considering going into the bar himself for a while.
Clearly, as a lawyer's clerk, he was, that was a way he could have taken. Luckily, he got into reporting then, and then that leads him into that writing career. But I love this line here. The numerous other ingenious machines put in motion for the torture and torment of His Majesty's liege subjects and the comfort and emolument of the practitioners of the law. That's what the legal offices are. They are there to torture regular people, but make money for lawyers. And some may say that today. But in Dickens's day, it was really true. I mean, it was, the practices that happen in this chapter and throughout Dickens's novels are characters are exaggerated for effect and that kind of thing. But he's not lying. This is the way it went. A lawyer could just stretch out your case longer in order for you to pay him more money, and there was nothing you could do about it. And you could lose your case, or you could win your case and still have to pay money, because whoever you want to get, as happened to Dickens when he's suing everybody over Christmas Carol, and he wins, and then the publisher goes bankrupt, and Dickens has to pay the court costs. Somebody's got to pay. But that famous Bleak House case, Jarndyce versus Jarndyce, which goes all so long, those things happened. And that that people would people would wait for inheritances, and as it's going through this court system, the inheritance would gradually be whittled away by the lawyers. Lots of by the end of the century, there are so many legal reforms, including one of the things of getting rid of sergeants in law, which we'll talk about a little bit later today. But Pickwick is going to visit his first we have Jackson from Dodson and Fogg is going to come and serve subpoenas on Dickens's on Pickwick. I do that all the time. Dickens and Pickwick are just the same person to me. They're not the same person. Pickwick is a character. He of course has some traits of Dickens, but he's not Dickens. Um, they the Pickwickians are about to be served, and Jackson does. There was a curious thing about his description here, James. His long hair was scrupulously twisted round the rim of his napless hat. I no idea how to picture that. Um, his long hair was twisted around the rim of his napless hat. You know, I guess he's got long hair and he twisted around the hat to keep the hat on instead of having a hat fastener, or like it's just bizarre. Um, um, I wish we had that in the picture. We don't have that in the picture.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there either.
I missed the picture. Oh my God, I shared that. We shared the ice skating picture of from your puzzle, but we didn't share the fizz picture of Mr. Pickwick. Sorry. Back up everyone, because we need to see Mr. Pickwick on the ice as drawn by Fizz. And there he is. And here's, I guess this is Wardle and Sam and the fat boy in the back cheering him on. Winkle's still just sitting here, like I'm not even getting up at this point. Um, and I'm assuming this must be Benjamin Allen, because he has the glasses on, the barnacles, and this is Bob Sawyer, looking a bit dissipated here. And the ladies and the rest of the troop all around. But here's Mr. Pickwick, a very fun little picture. Of him on the ice. Well, we had to see that. Sorry, I didn't share it at the proper time, but there it is. A lot of faces from the show. I love this too. I love here we have whoever this is maybe this is Arabella Allen looking right at us. You know, she's giving that look to us like, isn't this a fun time we're all having here? All right. On to the story, on to the lawyers, or the lawyers' clerks. Jackson comes and has to serve the subpoenas on all of Pickwick's friends. He serves, and we'll go through this one kind of quickly, this little scene. He gives Snodgrass, Tupman, Winkle, and Sam Weller all get served. They also get a shilling, which I didn't remember from this, and which I've since left. I mean, I don't know. If I got, subpoenaed and they give you money, that doesn't happen anymore, I don't think. But here they would give you a shilling, or maybe it still happens in England, to cover your expenses, to, for your trouble. You get a shilling as well. And they all have to, when he finally, Jackson says it's a subpoena in Bardell and Pickwick on behalf of the plaintiff. We find out the trial is February 14th. Sam will point this out in a moment, that it is Valentine's Day. And when he finally goes to Mr. Pickwick's trying to get some information out of him, well, Jackson thinks this. Mr. Pickwick's like, why are you serving my friends subpoenas? Are you trying to get them to speak against me? And Jackson's like, I'm not telling you anything. And at one point it says, applying his left thumb to the tip of his nose, he worked a visionary coffee mill with his right hand, which I think is this, and it's called taking a grinder. Is that what I'm supposed to be doing? I was looking around for this to find it, and it's just funny that this was like a thing people would do. I don't know what it means really. A graceful piece of pantomime, then much in vogue, but now unhappily almost obsolete. Dickens writes. So people weren't even doing this anymore. Why weren't they doing this anymore? Now it looks like a movie, like you're shooting a movie if you did that. That's the thing for movie, right? For, I don't know. but it's weird. But it's taking a grinder. So, and it'd be a coffee grinder. That's the coffee. That's the grinder motion there. I don't know. It's hard to find this kind of thing, info for this. I did some researching on this, and it was, this is one of the examples of it, is what it is. And Dickens writes what it is for everybody to describe this, but we don't necessarily have the complete. It seems to be also related to the whole kind of this thing for people. So it's, we're not quite sure. But anyway, he does that. And then he serves Weller, and we have this very funny exchange between the two of them. I'll do Jackson, and it's just when he says Samuel Weller said, "Mr. Jackson," you have that there. Mr. Pickwick bestowed a look of excessive disgust.
Which page are you on?
This is chapter 31. It is after he served everyone else, and then taking a grinder. You want to know in the issue?
Yeah.
Then in the issue, it is page 318.
318. Where are
towards the bottom. Samuel Weller.
Samuel Weller, said Mr. Jackson.
So I'll do him. Samuel Weller, said Mr. Jackson inquiringly.
One of the truest things, as you've said for many a long year, replied Sam in a most composed manner.
Here's a subpoena for you, Mr. Weller, said Jackson.
What's that in English? Inquired Sam.
Here's the original, said Jackson, declining the required explanation.
Which?
This,
said Sam.
Shaking the parchment. This.
Oh, that's the original, is it? Said Sam. Well, I'm very glad I've seen the original, because it's a gratifying sort of thing and eases one's mind so much.
And here's the shilling, said Jackson. It's from Dodson and Fogg's.
And it's uncommon handsome a Dodson and Fogg as knows so little of me to come down for the present, said Sam. I feel it as a very high compliment, sir, and it's a very honorable thing to them, as they knows how to reward merit wherever they meets it. Besides which, it's very affectin' to one's feelings.
I love these little exchanges with Sam. So, just the first line too. Sam Weller, one of the truest things you've said for many a long year. It's just that Sam's quick. He's always ready to answer anyone, anything, with a little bit of sly humor always. But Sam is served too.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam also will now point out to Mr. Pickwick that, the trial is on Valentine's Day, sir. Regular good day for a breach of promise trial. So that's when the trial will be. And we'll be getting to that next month. The famous trial of Bardell versus Pickwick. Well, Mr. Pickwick wants to go see his lawyer and talk the case over. And they do a little tour of the town here. Sam gives Mr. Pickwick a little tour of the streets on the way. This is, it was a nice pork shop here. And then here was a celebrated sausage factory, said Sam. And then he goes into this story about the sausage factory in which he has a termagant wife who's always bothering him, and then I'm going to leave for America, but then he apparently gets caught in his sausage machine and made in the sausages, and people come in who have eaten them and complain because there's buttons in there. Anyway, it's almost like an interpolated tale, right? Because we had the goblins, but there's no interpolated tale here. But instead, we get this, and we'll get another story in a little while that instead of doing an interpolated tale, now Dickens realizes, have characters who could a funny character especially, who could just give a little story in dialogue, which is really important. And this is why it's different than the interpolated tales, because it's Sam speaking in his kind of Cockney Weller voice, doing the story. And this seems to be the great inspiration for this character anyway, that Dickens saw these kinds of comic characters on stage who would come out and tell these stories in this, Cockney accent voice, which were very funny. And this is the kind of character that Sam is. So now we get these two. Last month we had this when we had the Sam telling the story of the fat man who gets hit in the belly and has his watch stolen, right? And it's like, well, it's not even, what's the point of that? Like, I didn't even think it was funny. But it would be really funny, which I didn't mention last month, with a character like Sam telling it to you. And I'm sure this probably happens sometimes with people reading these stories aloud to each other, is when they read these stories out loud, they'd be much funnier than just reading them.
And with an accent that is
Yeah.
recognizable, because the whole switching of the V's and W's,
Yeah.
clearly people used to do that at some point. That used to be considered a Cockney thing.
Yeah.
But nobody does that anymore. So
No.
it's hard to read today. Though
Yeah.
I wanted to point out there's a reference here to Burke and Hare, who you brought up earlier.
That's right. I forgot that.
Because, yeah, Mr. Pickwick says, you don't mean to say he was burked, Sam. And burked is the verb form that comes from Mr. Burke's name. To burk someone is to kill them for their body.
Yeah. That's funny. I'd forgotten that. Yeah. I didn't catch that here. It's also, Dickens also realizes, I have Sam. I'm going to make sure I give Sam a little time here too. He's so popular. I mean, he becomes the most popular character early on. I mean, as soon as he appears, he becomes the most popular character to the reading public at the time. And there's, Weller corduroys you can buy and all kinds of, the Weller merchandise is starting to, Weller cigars, people are calling them, that you can buy at the time. And so he wants to give Weller a chance, I think, to tell his little stories. When they arrive at Perker's office, there's a moment here of real pathos that I think it's the first time in this text that it shows up, in this book that it shows up. And it'll really come up later in the book in different moments. But here it's this poor stranger who's trying to get in to see Perker as well. And he's been told he's out of town. He's rustily clad, miserable looking man in boots without toes and gloves without fingers. And it also says he felt his poverty, for he shrank to the dark side of the staircase as Mr. Pickwick approached. And Perker's Clark Lowton here is just not being nice to him and telling him, oh, he's not here. He's out of town. You can't see him. And he winks slyly at Mr. Pickwick as if to intimate that some exquisite piece of humor was going forward, though what it was, Mr. Pickwick could not for the life of him divine. I mean, his humor is that I'm going to tell the guy he's not here to get rid of him. And this guy's just like, oh, please, I just need to know what's happening with my case. We find out he's a bankrupt and he's got a case in Chancery, and it's only been 4 years. So Lowton's like, come on, that's nothing. This guy needs money, and he's got a case, and it can't be solved, or it's not being solved because the lawyers are making it that way. And anyway, he's being mean to him, and he thinks it's funny. And what I like about this is Pickwick doesn't understand this. Pickwick doesn't. It says that Mr. Pickwick could not for the life of him divine. Like he doesn't get the joke because Mr. Pickwick wouldn't do. That's not a joke. It's just mean. And I like how, they get that here. So, but this is a moment where we are also supposed to recognize, I think, with Mr. Pickwick that, that this kind of meanness goes on, and it's not just funny satire with the courts, is that there are people suffering because of it. And Dickens gives us that moment of showing us somebody who's suffering. Before we get to meet Sergeant Snubbin, who is just ridiculous. And so, and that's probably the point of it. It's, he can't just show like they're all ridiculous. Aren't they all ridiculous and funny? There's a point to this. And And it is these people who, you know, who are just ground up by the courts. Well, we meet Sergeant Snubbin, and he is a sergeant at law. And instead of trying to paraphrase another definition of what they are, from my penguin, the Patrick Wormold, or is it Patrick Wormold? Is it Mark Wormold? His note says sergeants at law were a superior order of barristers whose rights and privileges were resented and attacked throughout Dickens's adult life. In 1834, they lost the exclusive right to lucrative cases in the Court of Common Pleas. The requirement that all common law judges were chosen from the order of sergeants at law continued until the 1873 Judicature Act. The order itself was abolished in 1880. But the idea that they're the special barristers who get the most lucrative cases, and in the British court system, for everybody, if you don't remember, there's solicitors, and they give legal advice to clients, and there's barristers who speak in court and to the judge. So basically, solicitors talk to the clients, barristers talk to the judge, and the barristers actually work for the solicitors.
You as a client needed a solicitor to solicit the services of the barrister.
Of the barrister, yes.
You were not allowed to go directly to the barrister.
Yes. And the sergeants then, at this time, they don't exist now, were these very high-ranking barristers. Dickens is definitely going to show how useless these guys are. And how much damage they can do. We'll meet the most famous one next month, Sergeant Buzzfuzz. He's the one against, you know, Dickens. He's the one representing Mrs. Bardell. But poor Pickwick is stuck with Sergeant Snubbin. And he wants to have a consultation with him, which, according to Parker, like, you can't do that. That never happens. You know, they don't talk to you. But apparently, you know, Pickwick wants no, I'm going to talk to him. Before he does that, he actually talks to Parker and tells Parker that, you know, I'm not going to he asks who it is, and he tells him it's Sergeant Snubbin. And Parker doesn't seem to have, you know, much good to say about how his case is going to go. So that's when Mr. Pickwick says, I want to see Sergeant Snubbin. And he does. And when he gets there, the Snubbin's office is gray with dust and age. He has an elderly clerk whose sleek appearance and heavy gold watch chain presented imposing indications of the extensive and lucrative practice of Mr. Sergeant Snubbin. So on the one hand, he makes a lot of money. On the other hand, he's old and dusty and something from the past that, you know, I think for Dickens here is useless. And from the people in his time too thought, I can't believe these things are still going on. Well, that's what you get when you've got, you know, court systems for, you know, 1,000 years or more. So, that haven't changed much in his day. They finally get to, well, they take him over to see him, and Snubbins is a lantern-faced, sallow-complexioned man about 5 and 40, or as the novels say, he might be 50. Dull-looking with a boiled eye. Slovenly style. As they walk in, it says the dust flew out from the carpet in little clouds at every step. And he meets Snubbin, and Snubbin kind of really doesn't have much to say about anything, about the case. Pickwick, though, is there because he says, he explains how his position, like, I haven't done anything wrong, and you need to know that. and that unless you sincerely believe this, I would rather be deprived of the aid of your talents than have the advantage of them. Um, Mr. Pickwick is like, but wait a minute. I just need to come here and tell the truth, and no one else is acting like that has anything to do with his case, is going in and telling the truth. It's all about other things. It's all about people speak on your behalf and fees and, and it's not about what actually happens. Right? I'm not missing this. Am I, James?
I think that for Pickwick, the important thing is you need to know that I'm innocent.
Right.
And I don't think that Snubbins cares.
Yeah.
I don't
So
think any
what
of
does
these
that have to
people
do with
care.
anything?
Yeah.
Well, Snubbin also has an assistant, and that's Mr. Funky. Funky with a PH, of course. So it's like a Philadelphia dude with funk. Mr. Funky, another great Dickensian name. And they call him in to like, he's like, well, let's talk to Mr. Funky. And there is a picture uh, from Fizz. This is the second illustration in this issue. And let me share that now. And here they are in Snubbin's quarters. And this is Snubbin here sitting at his desk, right? I think, and this will be Perker. And here's Funky sticking his head in. Note the cobwebs up in the top here. There's some kind of bust up here in the books, but everything's just piled up here as if this is just old stuff that doesn't matter. Here's his desk with all the papers piled up and falling off. And Mr. Funky just putting his head in. Hello. But interesting. Look at his face here. And Snubbin, Sergeant Snubbin, and Dickens wrote a letter to Fizz about this in January, earlier in the month. He had written to Fizz and said, I think the sergeant should look younger and a great deal more sly and knowing. He should be looking at Pickwick too, smiling compassionately at his innocence. The other fellows are noble. So apparently when the draft of this Fizz had sent to Dickens, these guys, everybody looked as they look, but Snubbin wasn't looking at Pickwick as he is here. And he was also perhaps a little older, and Dickens wanted him to look a little younger and looking at Pickwick, but also that he should be looking at Pickwick too, smiling compassionately at his innocence. That's interesting.
The way Dickens describes it, he sounds old,
Yeah.
which is why it's interesting that he said, no, 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 make him younger.
Well, perhaps because he had said 45 to 50, and perhaps Fizz had originally drawn him as like a 70-year-old man thing, So, maybe that was to make him younger. But it's this smiling compassionately at his innocence. I don't get compassion in this passage at all, though, from Dickens. I don't realize I don't quite get what he's trying to tell Fizz there. I would think that he would be smiling satirically at his innocence, or that he wouldn't be taking Mr. Pickwick very seriously over this because his innocence doesn't seem to matter to him at all. He tells Funky, he says, perhaps you would take Mr. Pickwick away and hear anything Mr. Pickwick may wish to communicate. We shall have a consultation, of course. And then that's it. And then, Mr. Funky doesn't really tell him anything. He says, there's no conversation here. It's just that they held a long conference, the result of which was that it was a very difficult matter to say how the verdict would go, that nobody could presume to calculate on the issue of an action, that it was very lucky they had prevented the other party from getting Sergeant Snubbin. I mean, Funky doesn't help him out at all. But Um, I think there's a lot of satirical meat left on the bone here for me. For both of these first two chapters, James, I think this. And I'd written to you and mentioned this to you that
Yeah.
so far I'm a bit disappointed in this serial. I think the whole ice skating thing could have been a lot funnier than it was. It was just one little Mr. Winkle crashes into them, and then Mr. Pickwick skates and falls to the like. I got the feeling that there could have been so much more in there, and then especially now with this legal system stuff, I wasn't nearly as funny as I wanted it to be.
Yeah, I remember for the bicentennial of Dickens's birth, we were doing a bunch of readings at different libraries and community centers and such. And Mike Quinn, who founded the Friends of Dickens New York, he was like, "Oh, I've got this great reading. We're going to do Mr. Pickwick Falls Through the Ice. It'll be hysterical." And I was just like, I don't even remember that incident in Pickwick Papers, but okay. And we did it, and we read it like once for one audience, and never again because it should be funny, and the Mr. Pickwick saying to Miss Wrinkle, "Oh, you're a humbug." That should be really funny. It was really hard to play. And the second chapter too, but then we get to Bob Sawyer's party,
Now
which
it'll
is a
get
banger.
good. Yes, and I'm also thinking too because this novel has been on such a high, and then especially that Christmas chapter and the Goblins of Stall Sexton is such a great story that I also think with so Dickens is so busy on the holidays. He's got his plays that are running. He's going to all these parties, and he's got the new magazine. He's doing Twist. He's got a child being born. He's sick. I think his creativity may have lagged a bit on this issue here, and we don't get Dickens at peak form for these. And I'm saying it for like two chapters of like a
Yeah.
50 some chapter book. But it did hit me right off the bat. There was a little bit of a let down after the great Christmas issue of number
But the
20.
Bob Sawyer chapter was so popular, Dickens did this as part of his
Yeah.
readings.
Now this
And
chat and I think is and because it's good and this one
yeah,
really works well. Um, the ice skating thing too. I think it's like if you see it, like you could do like in a film, it would be hilarious. You could really play up all the physical comedy, but there's only so much physical comedy you can play up in a written text. Um, so chapter 32, which describes far more fully than the Court Newsman ever did, and that was Dickens. He was a Court Newsman. A bachelor's party given by Mr. Bob Sawyer at his lodgings in the Borough. And here we are on Lance Street, where Dickens, as we mentioned, lived as a child, like by himself with like a landlady
yeah,
or somebody that
yeah.
owned the place, but he was just a 12-year-old kid there. Um,
And he talks about how so many of these residences are to let,
yeah,
which is what he was there to do as well. And later, when he wrote the autobiographical fragment that he gave to Forster, he talked about buying food on the street because he didn't really know what he was doing. He was a kid. And so he would like pass a bakery and he would like buy a pastry because he was hungry and the pastry looked good. And if he really knew what he was doing, maybe he would have spent his money a little bit more wisely than, buying the pastry. But he didn't know what he's doing because he was a kid. And then when he talks about the people in the neighborhood of Land Street, he's talking about the little street food that they're selling as well. So much of the description that he gives is perhaps the child's eye view that he had when he was younger and he himself lived on Land Street.
mhm. He also has in this opening here that's the description of Lance Street that it's Um, if a man wished to abstract himself from the world, to remove himself from within the reach of temptation, to place himself beyond the possibility of any inducement to look out of the window, we should recommend him by all means go to Land Street. And that's firsthand knowledge. That's how he knows what this place is like. Um, you could see a lot of mangling going on there. For 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 contemporary people here, mangling is a clothes washing process. The mag you put it, that's when you press all the water out, usually through rollers or there's other kind of devices to to get to that be happen. There's also the pot boy, the muffin youth, and the baked potato man.
Mhm.
Let me tell you, there are three things I wish were still in existence. That, a pot boy where I could, hey, pot boy, and have him come and bring me a pot of ale from the bar, would be awesome. And somebody selling muffins, but also, come on, a baked potato man, that'd be great. Somebody selling hot baked potatoes on the street, I would love that. Um, I know that they weren't as, hygienically they didn't have to follow any rules about keeping their food and drink clean. So I don't really want it their way. I want it now. They'd have to regulate it. The health department would have to regulate the baked potato man, but I want them. So, Jay, I was just in New York recently, and I hadn't realized that it was still a big thing to sell the nut vendors to buy
Yep.
hot nuts on like it was like on almost anywhere where there were vendors, there were people selling. Because in Philadelphia, it's just it's food, but sandwiches and hot dogs, that kind of stuff. Or there's fruit vendors, but we don't have any nut vendors that I ever see in Philadelphia, but they're everywhere in New York.
Maybe we've just changed the types of foods that we sell on the
Yeah.
street because yeah, we've got the mango ladies and the nut vendors and uh they're I guess in Dickens's day you didn't have people selling cut mangoes out on the street, but you do in New York today.
No pot boy. Not when you're realizing like, I'm in a beer. I need a beer, and you holler down or send somebody out to find the pot boy to bring you a nice
Yeah.
giant pot of ale. That's what I need. So, and then it costs a penny. That's what I need too.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
Well, that's the kind of neighborhood this is. And Bob Sawyer has got his house all set up here. Party preparations, they're all ready. The umbrellas are in a heap in the little corner. Um, the only two pairs of pattens on the street door mat pattens for everybody. There were those wood and like circular metal uh, base on them that you would use to walk through the mud.
Yep.
And
Put them on the bottom of your shoes.
and he's purchased the spirits and made sure because he went himself to have them, to bring them home so they didn't get delivered somewhere else. The punch was ready made in a red pan in the bedroom. The table has the green baize cloth so they can play cards, and they had to get more glasses for the establishment, which is also interesting too. That you would also borrow glasses from the public house. It's like, oh, I'm having a party, I need a bunch of glasses, and you would get a little crate of glasses from them. um, you're on your own now. So, well, no, I mean, if you have a party and you paper rental, you get glasses too. I guess that still goes on, but it's just not as convenient as this was then. Um, but Bob Sawyer has a problem first because his landlady, Mrs. Rattle, wants to be paid.
Mm.
She says, if I can afford to give a party, I ought to be able to pay her confounded little bill. Um, How long has it been running? Inquired Ben Allen. And then Dickens has his line here. A bill, by the by, is the most extraordinary locomotive engine that the genius of man ever produced. It would keep on running during the longest lifetime without ever once stopping of its own accord. And this is something that Dickens knows well because he's a guy that makes money and then spends all his money. Um, Constantly and just living, like just regular life, food, drink, going out, taking care of my family, and it's just bill after bill. And Dickens has spent, especially the all through 1836, constantly asking his publishers for a little more money. I need a little more money. I need a little more money to maintain his expenses at home. And this will continue for really his life, but especially the next few years when he really starts to run out of money. Then he starts to live a little too much. And he doesn't want to end up like his father, but he never will because he works so hard. And Dickens is just gonna, yeah, I'll write another book. Will you pay me? And then Dickens will do it. Um, but he knows bills. And he's knowing them more now that they've got the child at home now. So I'm sure the money was flying out of the house in 1837 in January. Um, and Ben out, but Bob Sawyer here, though, his bill keeps running along because he won't pay it. Um, he hasn't paid it in over a quarter. So over 3 months, he hasn't paid his, his rent. And Mrs. Rattle wants it. Um, he calls it an inconvenience that he's not paying her yet, but she's, oh no, it's not an inconvenience. Don't worry. You'll just pay me because you said you were going to pay me, and you're a gentleman, and gentlemen may keep all their promises. And but he won't, and so it's like a shouting match, and she tries to get her husband to come up by shouting even louder, but her husband doesn't pay any attention. Like he's not going to go up and fight with the tenants.
Well, what I love about this scene is Mrs. Rattle is not expecting to get paid, and
Yeah.
she's just waiting to hold forth on this long tirade that she wants to make. And this is something we get in a lot of Dickens characters that is, I think, a real bit of shrewd psychological insight into something we don't talk about a lot, which is people's desire for the bad stuff. He talks about this quite openly with Miss Havisham, for instance, in Great Expectations, where there's this relish she takes in being miserable. And with Scrooge too, one of the reasons he's such a popular character is when he is being miserable, he's almost enjoying the misery, it seems like.
Hmm.
And so in the installment, this is page 330, it says, "This was all Mrs. Rattle wanted. She had bustled up to the apartment of the unlucky Bob Sawyer, so bent upon going into a passion that in all probability payment would have rather disappointed her than otherwise. She was in excellent order for a little relaxation of the kind, having just exchanged a few introductory compliments with Mr. R. in the front kitchen. Do you suppose, Mr. Sawyer, said Mrs. Rattle, elevating her voice for the information of the neighbors. So she wants to be heard. Do you suppose that I'm a-going day after day to let a feller occupy my lodgings as never thinks of paying his rent, nor even the very money laid out for the fresh butter and lump of sugar that's brought for his breakfast, and the very milk that's took in at the street door? Do you suppose a hard-working and industrious woman as has lived in the street for 20 years, 10 years over the way, and 9 years and 3/4 in this very house, has nothing else to do but to work herself to death after a parcel of lazy, idle fellers that are always smoking and drinking and lounging when they ought to be glad to turn their hands to anything that would help them pay their bills? Do you?"
My good soul. And she gets interrupted here by Benjamin Allen, who's like, a good thing he interrupted, but that would have gone on for a good half an hour, right? Well, good thing for Sawyer, right? I mean, she just would have kept going. But you're right. This is all she wants to do. She wants to just holler at him and get it all out. And I'm sure, Mr. Rattle is hearing this all the time. So Mr. Rattle doesn't want to come upstairs because I already hear this all the time. So he's kind of stay out of it.
Well, he shouts about it, but he shouts about it from downstairs in his
Yeah.
bedroom.
Yeah. And then Benjamin Allen has the says uh bu- 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 he says, but you are such an unreasonable woman.
I know she wants to get paid. How dare the landlord want to be paid?
And then what she gets angry at is not that he called her unreasonable, but she says, but who do you call a woman? Did you make that remark to me, sir? And he's like, what? So he called her a woman, like she's just some common person. And that's the term that she gets, And that's now she's trying to get her husband upstairs to come up and save her from being abused by these, young men when she's just, come to get the rent that they owe her or get the rent from Sawyer. Um, well, just at the end of this, Mr. Pickwick arrives. So she well, she storms out, throws down all the umbrellas, disappears into the back parlor, and then Mr. Pickwick arrives. Um, the and the guests too, and they're let in by the girl who just says, yeah, they're upstairs and walks away, thinks like that's all I have to do. So, doesn't have good servants here either. This is the place where they live. This is where Sawyer lives. You wouldn't have, good servants there. And as they arrive, Hopkins arrives first, and he was detained at Bartholomew's Bart's Hospital, Bartholomew's Hospital, another teaching hospital, but it's more famous, not for its name appearing in Dickens here. Bartholomew's was the place where Dr. John Watson is introduced to this other young man who is looking to share lodgings at 221B Baker Street. And when he meets him, this young man says, "You have been in Afghanistan, I presume." The first line from Sherlock to Watson. There's even a plaque there that one of the Baker Street Irregular Science Societies has put up saying this is the place where they met, and Holmes said, "You have been in Afghanistan, I presume." So it still exists. Bart's Hospital, it's still there. I think it's still a teaching hospital too. Um, and that's where Hopkins has been detained. So he's another medical student. And he's all happy because an accident was brought in, a good accident. And Mr. Pickwick says, "What was that, sir?" "Only a man falling out of 4 pair of stairs window, but he's a very fair case indeed." And then Mr. Pickwick's like, "Oh, you mean he'll recover?" And he's like, "No, but there will be a splendid operation tomorrow. Hopefully Slasher will do it. Mr. Slash. You don't want your doctor called Slasher, okay? When he's about to operate, but that's his name. And he's great because one day, best alive, his Mr. Slasher. Took a boy's leg out of the socket last week. Boy ate 5 apples and a gingerbread cake exactly 2 minutes after it was all over. Boy said he wouldn't lie there to be made game of, and he'd tell his mother if they didn't begin. So uh the and then Hopkins tells a story about a kid swallowing a necklace, and it's a story like Sam's, and we get this long evolved story of the kid stop this wooden beads in a necklace. He eats one, and it's his sister's necklace. Oh, it's delicious. And every day he's eating another bead, and then he's starting to rattle, and everybody gets all upset at the rattling. What's that sound? They realize it's in him, and he goes to the hospital, and they have to keep him quiet. They have to muffle him up because the rattling is so loud. And it is especially going to be a very funny story if you get somebody to stand up and tell the story in these kind of dialects that Dickens is using here for his characters that he uses with Sam, that he's that he would have here in the spelling of the way these you can see it in the spelling of the way the characters talk. And I just thought it was very interesting in this issue that without an interpolated tale, we have these two stories like this. And I think that's almost Dickens having a way with saying, like, this is all I need to do for this novel at this point. I don't need to stop and throw in one of these tales. Like the goblins really fit because it was the Christmas Eve tale, and that worked well for that. But I can't remember. There are going to be more interpolated tales, but I think they slow down now for the rest of the book.
I think that's right.
We had one in almost every issue, and now they slow down. And I think this might be one of the reasons. Dickens realizes I can do this with characters and then come on and tell a little short, funny story that has nothing has in one way has nothing to do with the text, in another way continues some kind of mood theme that he has going on. Um, but it gives him free rein to use dialogue and dialect to tell funny stories. Well, everybody arrives. We have the first installment of Punch, it says, which I like the sound of because that means there's going to be more installments if this is the first installment. Um, and I love the descriptions, James, of all the people that arrive. A large-headed young man in a black wig who brought with him a scorbutic youth in a long stock. And scorbutic means that he has a kind of look of scurvy about him, so he doesn't look very healthy. A gentleman in a shirt emblazoned with pink anchors, a pale youth with a plated watch guard, and on and on. And then they had the first installment of Punch, and then they were going to have 3 hours devoted to that et un 21, at 6 pence a dozen. So that et un 21, blackjack. The rules pretty much have not changed for hundreds of years. I think the game was invented in like Spain or something like that in the 15th century or something, and it's still the same game. It's just basically you try to get 21 and you win if you do, or the person who is closest to it wins.
Yeah.
It's still the same game. They'll mention a natural here in a little bit. A natural is when you get 21 on the deal. They mention when they count up the fish at the end, the fish and sixpences. Fish are the markers you use for your money. I think we had that already in this book. They but we get a little conflict here between this scorbutic youth who has the burning desire to pull the nose of the gentleman with the emblems of hope. I like that phrase there. It means anchors, and the anchor is an emblem of hope. And in reply to which that individual expressed his decided unwillingness to accept of any sauce on gratuitous terms, either from the irascible young gentleman with the scorbutic countenance or any other persons who was ornamented with a head. So this is the chapter where it's Dickens's language, everything he's describing. Now he's getting really clever and funny throughout this whole chapter, and it really holds up. Well, we're running a little long, as we always do, but they have their dinner. They have but that doesn't work out well. They have to wake up the girl who's fallen asleep. The oysters weren't opened. The ham and the beef aren't done right, but there's plenty of porter in a tin can. And then they have another jug of punch. They have their cigars. They have a couple bottles of spirits, probably rum and brandy. The only issue is the girl keeps washing the glasses. And I didn't catch this at first, but James, tell me, she keeps forcibly dragging every man's glass away long before he had finished his beer, and audibly stating, despite the winks and interruptions of Sawyer, that it was to be conveyed downstairs and washed forthwith. Is she just stealing all their beer?
I interpreted that as she's trying to get them to finish up the party so she can go home.
Because all the glasses aren't quite empty, and I got the
Yeah.
impression here that she was like, this was her
Oh,
way of getting a half a glass of beer. I have to wash that, and then taking it and
oh,
disappearing.
that's very possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I thought she was sort of like not so subtly saying wind up the party and go home. But yeah, maybe she's after the half glass of beer in there.
Turns out they have no warm water, which is a shock, but that's because Mrs. Rattle has, uh, um, turned off the fire. She says you can't have any, so she has, raked up the kitchen fire so they can't have any warm water. And that's what people would do. You would take your spirits, your brandy, your gin, whatever. You would pour hot water in it, and you'd have a hot, drink. But they can't have that. Sawyer says, I fear I must give her warning, which he will need to do, so he doesn't have to pay his bill, and he'll probably abscond without paying his bill. I'll pay her what I owe her and give her warning tomorrow. Yeah. It says, poor fellow, how devoutly he wished he could.
Yeah.
Well, they have cold brandy and water, and then Mr. Noddy and Mr. Gunter, this is the scorbutic youth and the man with the anchors emblems on his shirt. They get into another little argument here, which is just funny. I thought, James, this was really funny. I took the opportunity of informing Mr. Gunter that he is no gentleman, and he responds, I'm afraid I shall be under the necessity of alarming the neighbors by throwing the person who has just spoken out a window. I like to see you do it. You shall feel me do it in half a minute. You'll favor me with your card, sir? And he says, no. And he says, because you'll stick it up over your chimney piece and delude your visitors into the false belief that a gentleman has been to see you, sir. And then the last one, he says, sir, a friend of mine shall wait on you in the morning, said Mr. Noddy. And do you have that there? Gunter replies,
no, I'm not sure where you are.
sir, I'm very much obliged to you for the caution, and I'll leave particular directions with the servant to lock up the spoons. Gunter's got a great, comeback for everything that, Noddy's throwing at him. But they make up, and, then they swear their devotion to each other, and everybody's fine. Hopkins offers to sing a song, and it's the song is "The King, God Bless Him,"
which he sang as loud as he could to a novel air compounded of the Bay of Biscay and A Froggy Wood.
Yes, he doesn't know the tune, but he knows the lyrics to the song. And here's actually a broadside of The King, God Bless Him, with the lyrics here. And it's all about drinking. A goblet of Burgundy, fill for me. Gives those who prefer it champagne. And then, but whatever you're drinking, the king, God bless him, the king, God bless him. And that's like the very simple, lyrics to it. But it's a drinking song. It's a song you sing at a public house with everyone and have a lot of fun. And you get to be patriotic while you're drinking. But this is a broad.
You get to sing it to whatever tune you want.
Yeah, because this is a broad set. Well, and songs could be. The songs for, the tune for ballads, that whole, Gilligan's Island song, dun, 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 dun. It works for ballads in general. But in this particular case, and this broadside that I'm sharing too, this is not in the Rosenbach collection. This is actually from the National Library of Scotland that I found this. But this is the way this is frequently the way ballads people would learn them, is they would get them on these, broadside sheets, buy them, and they learn the lyrics. Now, by the 19th century rolling in, then you get a lot of music being printed as well. Previous to the 19th century, you didn't get very much music being published, if at all ever. So very easy to learn lyrics here, but music requires a little more to learn. So what people would do is they would just, whatever tunes they knew, in this case, the Bay of Biscay, or A Frog He Would, when the rest of it is A Frog He Would Go A-Wooing, which was like an old nursery rhyme, but then became a popular song. It just, whatever the song is, I'll just sing these lyrics to it. So, and so the party's getting loud, and then clearly, Mrs. Rattle starts shouting to be, things that get quiet. Ain't it enough to be swindled out of one's rent and money let out of pocket besides, and abused and insulted by your friends that dares to call themselves men without having the house turned out of the window and noise enough made to bring the fire engines here at 2 o'clock in the morning? Turn them wretches away. So Now they're getting hollered at by the landlady. They need to break up the bar. And Sawyer even gives in. I'm surprised Sawyer gives in. Hopkins even suggests that should I keep on ringing the bell or go and groan on the staircase? You may command me, Bob, but no, the party should end. We need to do that. And they do. And Mr. Pickwick and his friends leave. Mr. Pickwick gets insulted by Mrs. Rattle as she leaves, right? Get along with you, old wretch. Old enough to be his grandfather, you villain. You're worse than any of them. So he is. These are young bachelors at their party. These are all young guys. They're all young medical students, and Mr. Pickwick's the oldest one of the bunch. They leave to go home, and Mr. Ben Allen, completely drunk, accompanies them. He unfortunately says to Winkle that he will cut the throat of any gentleman except Mr. Bob Sawyer, who should aspire to the affections of his sister Arabella. And then he would burst into tears, put his hat over his eyes, and keep knocking on doors, thinking that's where he lives, and taking naps all over the doorsteps of other places. So a drunken end to the evening, but not Pickwick and his friends. So I think that's interesting too. What we don't have in this chapter is one of the Pickwickians getting into drunken trouble at the end. It's now these other people that they've met. So maybe that means they're going to be more respectable for the rest of the book. James, what do you think? No, they're not. So. Well, that's it. No matter the chapter, it's always going to take this long to get through it. How do you feel about the end of this now? Because you said before this improved now, right? With the Bob Sawyer party.
Yeah. Which is why Dickens would do this at his readings. It as you stated, is something that lends itself to performance. You can perform a lot of the narrative and dialogue in this chapter.
Absolutely. Well, Pickwickians, thank you for joining us for number 11 of Pickwick Monthly. Remember that before we air next time, Dickens's birthday is on February 7th, 1812. I will be celebrating in Clark Park in Philadelphia on Sunday, February 4th. James will be celebrating February 3rd up in New York City. We'll post about these on our Facebook group page. But wherever you are on February 7th, raise a glass to the creator of Pickwick. James, thank you for joining me on our Pickwickian travels.
And today, the 20th of January, is Penguin Awareness Day. So if you see any penguins, be aware.
Wow, thank you. I will definitely be aware of a penguin if I see it. Thank you for that. Coming up next month, everyone, Jake Romano will return to discuss number 12, serial number 12, chapters 33 and 34. Where first we get some adventures with Sam and his father, Tony, and then the momentous trial of Bardell v. Pickwick. It's one of the most famous chapters in all of Dickens' works. Talk about the Bob Sawyer party and Dickens performing. He really performed the Bardell versus Pickwick chapter a lot in his own readings. Again, let me remind you all to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website. James, have a great month, everyone. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library. I'll see you all next month for number 12 of the Pickwick Papers. May all your idle moments be seen as eccentricities of genius. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.